And so you may all remember me from a little earlier today. Again, my name is Patricia Jerido, because we're saying our names over and over again. And I'm a leadership ambassador with Take the Lead. And I want to take a moment, especially for welcoming everyone who's tuning in to this from around the world. We have 17 countries participating in Take the Lead Day today. Before we move to our next panel, if you haven't already, I ask if you're watching from afar to download your personal power plan, and you can use that to help you through the rest of the day and to build your roadmap for the rest of this experience. So we're also asking everyone to support the work of Take the Lead by texting Take the Lead, one word, no space, to 41444. And your financial contribution allows us to deliver more events like this and provide tools and opportunities to pave the way for women's leadership and to build gender parity across all sectors by 2025. And just one last social media note I want to share. Please use the hashtag Take the Lead, again, one word, no spaces, to tell the world how you're taking the lead today. And again, because I'm a leadership ambassador, I get to celebrate Take the Lead nearly every day. And along with my colleagues across the country, I deliver our core trainings, the 9 leadership power tools, and work with women and men across the country and in different industries on how to use Take the Lead's learning curriculum. And one of the tools that we teach is power tool number 4, which we're going to be discussing today, which is to embrace controversy. And chances are that you've all read about, and some of you may have personally experienced, the often hostile environment experienced by women in tech that we hear about probably on a regular basis. And if you remember that infamous Google memo from a couple months ago, or how about the heroic Ellen Powell, controversy like that causes us to have a lot of immediate reactions, like hiding out or giving up. But when we get comfortable with controversy, it provides a platform. It nudges us to clarity. Controversy can be our teacher and a source of strength and a friend, especially when you're trying to make change. So we're going to be talking about that today. And Sara O'Brien, a brilliant journalist at CNN, who's been writing about these issues, we're so happy to have her here today moderating this panel. And we're pleased to have Sara to lead this conversation about embracing controversy and how to reach gender parity in tech. So welcome, Sara.
Hello. Sara O'Brien, reporter at CNN Tech. I cover tech culture. Mostly related to tech startups, but also just tech broadly. So I'm going to start with one quick stat. We don't want to talk too much about the current environment because I think people kind of already know a lot of the stats that are out there. But this one is particularly interesting and relevant to setting kind of the tone. So toxic work environments are driving women and people of color out of the tech workforce, and it's costing an estimated $16 billion a year, according to a recent report from the Kapur Center. So that's kind of what the current environment is, and we're going to talk about how can we change that, because we want to focus on driving change. So I'm going to start just having you guys each introduce yourselves, say a little bit about your company so people can kind of get a sense for what it is, but maybe like 1 to 2 sentences so we can carry on.
Hi, so Alok Kapur. I work at SAP, the German software company, in the office of the CEO, focused on long-term projects, looking at strategic investments and partnerships.
My name is Katica Roy. I am the CEO of a company called Pipeline, which is a SaaS platform that uses artificial intelligence to increase financial performance of companies through closing the gender equity gap.
And again, Patricia Jerido. When I'm not a leadership ambassador, my firm is Leadership Matters Consulting, and I work with people committed to making social change, align their values with their actions.
Cool. So one of the things, we want to focus on action today, and one of the things that has to do with action is how we are really framing this conversation. When we're talking about, getting more women into tech, a lot of times it's framed as a women's issue. Katica, you said that, the conversation around gender equity should be focused on economics and on the leaky pipeline. Can you talk about more? What do you mean by that?
Sure, I can talk a little bit more about that. So there's been a lot of different research studies that have looked at the economics of gender equity and what's that is actually costing us, right? So McKinsey is probably the most well-known, and within the United States, we have a $2 to $4 trillion GDP gap from not having gender equity. And IMF has talked about that as well. But the other part of that is that we often talk about gender equity as women's issues, but actually it's fundamentally an economic issue. So Jewel Beckford talked about the feminization of poverty. So in my home state of Colorado, and this is generally true across the United States, if you are a single mother, you are twice as likely to live in poverty than if you are compared to your single father peers, and 5 times more likely than married parents. Mm-hmm. We know what the pay gap is, but there's also opportunity gaps, where, across the United States, the top 2% wage earners, men compared to women are paid 69 cents on the dollar of their male peers. So it's fundamentally an economic issue. The other thing we have is a really leaky pipeline. So while women, it's great that they're actually increasing their education attainment, they're actually leaving the workforce. Mm-hmm. And they are projected to continue to leave the workforce until through 2024. And that's a problem when they are actually the most educated. And the other thing, just one other thing connected to that is there's a sort of a myth around mommy tracking, right, where women are not as committed to their jobs once they have children. But actually 90% of the women who leave the workforce when they have children, that's when they leave. It's not why they leave. Mm-hmm. They typically leave because they have actually already experienced the headwinds, and it just gets worse once you have children.
So I want to talk to you two, too, about how do you kind of create that dialogue with others as you're talking about, trying to get people to care about women in the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? All of us can do that in our personal lives, via our social networks, people we work with. But in the workplace, tangibly, I think having active conversations and a platform to create more of an atmosphere of inclusion, where women have an opportunity to come participate in career growth opportunities, have an opportunity to extend themselves, even if they don't have a technology education, right, a field that I work in, to really come and say, hey, it's something you'd like to do, right? And then men actively need to do a lot more to participate in mentoring, fostering, encouraging women to explore career opportunities, right? So I look at my employer, SAP, and we are consciously doing a lot of that, right? 2011, we made a very conscious commitment that we'd like to have, by the end of 2017, about 25% of our leadership positions filled by women. And we actually hit that goal 6 months prior to the end of 2017. So we're really, really proud of that, right? And then within the workplace, I think generally employers, especially in technology, can foster and create programs that essentially help people learn, get trained on how do you foster a more inclusive workplace. Right? So I think those are some of the tangible things that we are actually doing as a company, and I think all of us can do in our personal lives. I think also, for women, I'd encourage everyone, since we are focused on action today, reach out to people in your professional or personal network on LinkedIn or otherwise, and ask them what it would take to pursue a career in technology. I realize, we don't want to spend too much time talking about the current controversies that are going on. They're absolutely deplorable, what's going on in technology and media. There needs to be a zero tolerance approach. But in general, right, if you're interested in a career in technology and don't have a STEM education, let that not discourage you, right? Go and ask anybody you know in the field, cold call somebody on LinkedIn and say, hey, can you provide some advice? The one thing I can tell you is people love talking about themselves. Everybody likes to tell their own story. And so reach out and ask for help, right? It's tough when you reach out and say, hey, I would like to explore job opportunities, and can you help me find a job in your company? On the other hand, if you say, I'm really interested in what you're doing, can we have a quick chat or a cup of coffee? Most people would say yes.
Now, Patricia, with you and Take the Lead, how is it difficult to get companies to bring Take the Lead in to help with women in the workforce and understanding that that's like helpful for the company as a whole?
Right. Well, the beauty of Take the Lead is that we work with companies who are interested in doing that, right? So we're not going to beat ourselves against, the wall with people who would be resistant to that. But it is, right, the thing is about people who are looking at really true change. So we're not looking at a PR fix for these problems, right? And it is about the individual, it's about the system, and it's about the cultures within organizations that we have to examine and challenge and change. And what's great about tech industry, right, is that it's fundamentally about problem solvers and people who are looking at how do we make things better. And we have to push our expectations of that, because we can make all of these issues better. There's solutions for all of them.
So this is a great point about the PR kind of push, because I run into this a lot when I'm covering this issue. You see companies that have been caught in the headlines for scandals, and then you see them throwing money at a nonprofit or throwing money at organizations that are in the exact issue that they faced. And you want to believe that they're trying to really change, but how do you know? And I wonder if this has come up for you guys. Are there people that have come to you and you don't necessarily trust that they're going to use your service in the right way, or they won't, thoroughly, I guess, use the service in the way that they should, and it's more of just like an optics thing? How do you navigate that?
I can go first.
Go ahead, please.
So we actually work with, so similar to Take the Lead, we actually work with companies that have already made some sort of, typically a public pledge. So Jewel Beckford was here for Paradigm for Parity. That's one of them. There are a number of them. So to some extent, they're already bought in. And the way that Pipeline works is we actually track every single decision across pay, performance, potential, promotion, and hiring. And so you actually can see whether or not you're moving toward gender parity or you're not. So there's a commitment there to whether or not you actually want to move toward gender equity. So it's a consciousness raising, but it's actually, you see it in every decision that you make.
And are there companies that have inquired about you that then back away once they realize that?
So we actually don't sell it as a gender equity tool per se. And so one of the things that, and I mentioned this a little bit, but we actually did not launch with our product. We launched with changing the narrative around gender equity. And it was, and anyone can look it up, but it's fixtheleakypipeline.com. And we talked about fundamentally gender equity is an economic issue. And so whether or not you care about gender equity or even believe that it's an issue, it's fundamentally a massive economic opportunity here in the United States and across the world. So when we talk to them about it, we talk to them about, and the way we built our platform was actually about the financial upside that gender equity brings to your organization. We can tell them what they will get by using Pipeline. So what will be the economic upside for them, how long it will take for them to actually get there, and then we actually help work with companies to get there. So we don't sell it as a you should care about this from a gender equity perspective. We sell it as this is a massive economic opportunity, and here's how you actually get there.
I think sometimes, though, even still collecting that data, if people are aware that the data exists, it freaks them out. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think, firstly, I think I'll just agree with what Katica said, right? In the world of today, ignorance and or being reactive about these issues is no longer an excuse, right? There are tools and services available where you can track probably every metric you want to or even don't want to in a business, right? So I think, I speak about our own employer. So you look at SAP, right? So in 2016, again, it's a great data point and a source of pride for us as a company. We were the first global IT company to get EDGE certification, right? And this is across every metric you can see across diversity in the workplace, right? So we tangibly track how many programs we have, how many women are being fostered and encouraged and mentored to grow into leadership positions, right? How many trainings do we have here? right? So we've now also introduced a program activating men for parity. You need to tangibly encourage men to participate in programs where they can help foster, encourage, and mentor women, right, across the workplace. And I think to your earlier point, Katica, right, I think the economic impact of a more diverse workplace is just really, really obvious. We find in our workplace that the innovation, the scale of innovation has really amplified since we have a more diverse workplace, right? The more diverse opinions you have, the better product you build, the better services you build. You engage with customers and your business partners a lot better, right? So
And
I
I
think
would
across
add-
these things. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to add to that also, especially for businesses with individual consumer base, right? The PR solution has a shelf life to it. And so people need to be taking that into consideration. There's just so many times that you can go to that trough and put lipstick on a pig, as they say. And, right, you're going to have to eventually deal with this.
Do you both think that companies understand that they have to measure it, like that they need data?
You know, I think the recognition is growing now. Again, you know, we took a very proactive stance. That commitment we made back in 2011. I can tell you, having spent the better part of 2 decades in technology, that's more the exception than the norm. I think it's unfortunate that this cascading effect of all these controversies and these deplorable acts in technology and media, where you work, Sarah, is now forcing the conversation, and businesses are now being a little more conscious about trying to take more of a metrics-based approach, right? But does that broadly exist in the industry? I don't think so. Do we need to do more as technology companies? Absolutely. And like I said, you have, you know, tools and services today, HR platforms like we have Success Factors today. You know, there's a whole module around tracking leadership and diversity in the workplace. So like I said earlier, ignorance and saying that, oh, we are unable to do something is no longer an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think the other thing so 2 other data points. One is that 78% of CEOs put gender equality in their top 10%, but yet only 22% of employees see it regularly measured and tracked. And so what is important for employers to know is that we all are pretty smart, and data is pretty democratized, right? So if you are signing a public pledge, I am not just going to know that you're signing a public pledge. I'm probably going to be asking somebody, what is it really like to work in that company? Is there really meat behind that pledge, and are they actually living their pledge, right? And so as and you can do that in Glassdoor reviews, or Fairy Godboss. I know that, you know, that they're here today. I mean, there's lots of different. In Her Site is another one, but there's lots of different ways to actually get that information. And a lot of it happens, we talk to each other, and we know really what happens. And so that's really what employers are up against. And the data is there, and it's just becoming more and more transparent. I mean, I think one of the things that's happening, and, you know, a lot of the stories we hear now are the egregious stories, right? You know, sort of, if you think about gender equity as a continuum, there's everything from like bias, right, at the sort of more, you know, front end of it, all the way to, you know, assault, right? I mean, that's the entire continuum. All those things are connected. And now, you know, we have known for years that assault was happening. This is not a new thing. Like, this is not, if you look at the statistics for years, this is not a new thing. The difference is that we now have access to be able to share it. And we have access to each other. And we are all connected through things like Facebook and Twitter. I mean, I have a Facebook founders group that I'm part of. There are 30,000 of us in that female founders group. I knew almost every single person who had made an allegation in June when the entire venture capital, you know, that world blew up. I was connected to all those people. Those are not things you can shut down. And so now we have power of numbers, and now we can talk about it. And that's really the start to actually ending this. Because ultimately, the conversation should move away from this idea that we're actually reporting it. We should actually start talking about how we prevent it. How do we stop it from happening in the first place? And that really is ultimately where our discussion should lead to at some point.
I think that's great. I think, you know, one of the things, you know, we're talking about this as companies, but also as individuals in those companies, which I think is really important and probably relevant to most people here. And Alok, when we were talking earlier, you said that there was one woman who was going to be hired by SAP, and she wanted to, before accepting, she wanted to make sure that her team had empathy for her as a woman. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's a really great example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happens a lot. The majority of teams in technology tend to be dominated by men. And, history speaks to itself, right? It tends to be more of an engineering-dominated field. And if you go back to the genesis of engineering, this is not the forum to talk about how engineering evolved. We can have a separate discussion. But, it's generally drawn men into the fold, right? So I think for this particular candidate, the woman was really keen to understand, hey, if it's going to be just men, and I'm the only woman employee as part of that team, will I actually be respected? Will there be an opportunity for me to really amplify my voice and actions above all the mansplaining? And being a man, I will admit, all men mansplain. Any man who tells you he doesn't is just plain lying, right? And so I think
You're going to mansplain that to us.
I know exactly, right? We could have a whole session now, and I can mansplain for the next 20 minutes. But no, I think for her, right, it was important to assure her that, one, her opinion was valued, her contributions and experience were of true value to the team, and I wouldn't say that we chose to be gender blind, but make it known to her that her opinion was just as valuable as anybody else in the team, right? But then tangibly, to the extent she felt that, hey, there was an opportunity not just to speak to the men in the team, create more of a peer mentoring opportunity with other women in the organization, maybe not in the same team, help identify one or two senior female executives who she could look up to as role models and find out what their own challenges were to get to that spot, right? So these were some tangible actions that we took. She did accept the offer, is really happy at SAP, and I think everybody needs to do that, right?
It's interesting because I think a lot of people would probably shy away from calling attention to their gender, making themselves seem like they might be problematic or raise potential issues down the line. But it seems like you're saying, no, like embrace the controversies that are happening in other places and bring those to the attention of your employer so that they know that that they need to provide a safe environment.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I would encourage any woman or anybody in a minority group, right? Proactively approach the conversation with your employer. Find out, ask them about, speaking about data and tangible statistics, ask them, what their hiring practices are, how many minorities, or for women in particular, how many women have you hired in the last 3 to 5 years, right? These are the soft questions you have to ask, right? People get really focused through the opportunity exploration process on, what's my career trajectory going to look like, what's my sign-on bonus, how many RSUs can I get, stock options, and so forth. But I think these are some of the soft questions that, you should take an opportunity to address with employers. In fact, for women, I'd encourage you, right, when a technology company seeks you out, ask to get connected to somebody mid-level or senior in the HR diversity leadership development organization. Get tangible information from them about development opportunities, about growth opportunities, challenges they have faced in the workplace, right? I mean, all of these things in technology, to the earlier point, these issues have existed forever. There is no excuse, and I think technology as a sector, we just need to do a lot more to fix this.
I wonder, though, with those individuals, because I've been doing some reporting recently on HR departments, and HR departments, if they're good, they are going to, protect the employees as well, but the main thing that they're working for is the company. So, yeah, Katica and Patricia, I would love for you guys to weigh in on what he just said, and do you share the same opinion, or do you?
So, so when I get calls, when I would get calls from retained searches to work for a company, the first thing I would do is actually look at the website and see who's in which roles, and if there weren't any women, or at least beyond like the head of HR, right? It's like, and the head of marketing, then I would ask them, so tell me about your diversity and inclusion practices, because I would like to know that I could not just be successful in the role that you're going to hire me for, but actually I can build a career here. And how do I know, if there's no one that looks like me, that I can actually move into that role? And I think, that's really the bigger issue when we talk about gender equity and gender parity. And Jewel Beckford also talked about this. But we don't often see women or enough women in the power positions
Right.
in organizations. So that's like the head of sales. I mean, I worked in sales operations for much of my career. I can tell you they have the most power, and because they bring in revenue, and you need them. And so I would there's not, and if you don't have line experience, it's almost impossible to get promoted to be a CEO. Actually, in 2015, 90% of the new CEOs that were promoted were from the line, and 100% of them were men. And so those are the questions that we have. And I think, honestly, while certainly HR plays a part, it's not ultimately only HR's responsibility. Right? HR is one cog in a very big wheel. And yes, they do work for the company, but ultimately it's everybody's accountability. I think one of the things that we tend to do, which almost exacerbates the issue, is we tend to either put it on women or we tend to put it on HR. And ultimately, it should be everybody's responsibility, because if we are going to value differences, if we are going to really create an inclusive environment, we need to make sure that everybody can call out when mansplaining happens, or when bias happens, or any of those things that just don't quite look right. And that we can actually voice those, and that then we and it's an equal opportunity ability to voice it. Otherwise, what happens is the person who's actually willing to speak up at some point becomes the sacrificial lamb. Right? And we see that, right? So Ellen Pao is a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah.
And kudos to her for not signing a confidentiality agreement. But that's the other thing that happens.
Susan
is that
Fowler as well.
Susan Fowler is another one. But there are many women who had the courage not to do that. But there are also a lot of women who have signed those, who actually can't talk about their experience. And so that becomes an issue as well. So how do we really become far more transparent about what's happening? And I would say one last thing, which is that, and you talked about this a little bit in the beginning, Sarah, is the importance of men in the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? And we are not going to reach gender equity if it's a bunch of women talking to a bunch of women. We're just not. Because first of all, it affects men. Gender equity should include men, and they have most of the power positions. And one of the things that that concerns me is, and I talked a little bit about this, but really, when men come into the conversation, we actually treat gender equity as binary, like you're either for or you're against, rather than as a continuum. And we need to allow men to be part of the conversation and allow them to do it imperfectly, if we're going to bring them along. And that is something that must change if we really are going to solve this issue.
And yes, I love everything that you just said. And it was funny, I was smiling earlier because in my, experience, it's the soft questions that are the hardest questions, right? Usually to address and confront. And I think, again, what I would add to this is, especially for people who are looking for jobs in tech, who are moving in industries where you have that conversation of, will I be comfortable in it, to look at the systems around it too. So transparency definitely is something that I would be looking for within the organization. I would look for arbitration agreements, right? And is this something that is going to block, something that's going to happen? What are the procedures for when things do go bad, right? Because we are human beings and things are going to, be messy. And how have you dealt with this in the past, and how do you plan on dealing with this in the future? I think are all important things that you should be looking at, not just from talking to individuals, but it's clear, but looking at the systems within the organization along with the culture. But I would be looking at those systems pieces as part of my determination of where I want to go.
One last thing I'll add. So I agree with that, but I think on a positive note, right, as you're considering a career in technology for any woman, and you find that, the organization is still evolving in their gender inclusion practices, they're still trying to develop women into leadership positions, as I was saying earlier, as part of your harder negotiations around compensation and things like that, something that most employers are open to and is perceived very positively is try and negotiate some kind of an allowance for training, right? So if the organization itself doesn't really have, the forum today. Could you be that leader who creates that opportunity for them? Could you, as part of your, sort of employment opportunity and agreement, have the employers support your active participation in wonderful days like today, right? I can realize a lot of women, taking time from work on a weekday in the middle of the week, just before the holidays, coming to an event like that for the entire day is quite a significant commitment, right? But negotiate that up front, right? If you find there isn't enough of a base of mentors available in the organization, have them pay for you to join an organization where you can foster mentors on the outside, right? So I think most employers look at that very, very positively, right? So it sort of turns into a good counterbalance with, hey, do you have those arbitration agreements in place? How did you deal with past issues around sexual harassment and discrimination, which in most cases, it's tough because most employers are legally obligated wherein they cannot talk about those things, right? So if you ask them, do you have legal recourse, they'll say yes.
So I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I just want to circle back to the idea of activating men to help in this conversation. How do we do that, right? Because I think that one of the issues right now that we're facing is that this conversation is coinciding with the conversations about sexual harassment in industries like tech and media. And you see there's articles out there, there's people tweeting about the fact that men are now there's going to be a backlash with men not wanting to engage with women or not wanting to take meetings with women because they're afraid that they will be accused of sexual harassment. Now, obviously, we all know that if you don't sexually harass someone, you're not going to be accused for sexual harassment. However,
It's actually quite simple.
right. However, I do think that that some good men might be sitting on the sidelines, not engaging at all, not doing bad behavior, but just not engaging. So how do we activate them?
So, yeah, right. So first of all, there are a lot of really good men out there. I mean, we
Totally.
need, right? I mean, we have one sitting right here, right? And we have, and there are a lot of really good men out there. I think and I can relate to it because I'm white, right? So I can relate to it when we talk about race and ethnicity. And I know for me, I'm like, oh, and it's really important, especially when you talk about gender equity, it's critically important. And so I understand the not wanting to make a mistake for fear that I'll be judged, right? And probably judged pretty harshly for it because I have privilege, right? And so I think if we have to create the spaces for men to be part of the gender equity narrative, and we have to really start to talk about some of, so if we just go back to how we actually define gender, like what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, that's some of where this actually comes from, right? So there's a really good film called The Mask We Live In. And gender equity doesn't just affect women. It also affects men. Men are 4 times more likely to die from suicide than women because we tell little boys don't cry. And we tell them that it's not okay to have emotions, right? We tell men that their value in our society is by being a provider. And yet, 48% of working dads would like to stay home with their kids. They want to play a different role. And so we have to create we have to create a space where everybody can be part of this narrative and part of actually moving toward this and really looking at really an inclusive narrative where gender equity is not just about women. It is about men. It is about children. It is about it's about sexual orientation. It's also about sexual identity. I mean, it touches almost every single facet. And so, I think the ability to be tolerant and inclusive is really important if we're going to reach that.
And do you want to say what your program is that you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So at my current employer, again, really proud of what SAP is doing. We're actually introducing a program, Activating Men for Parity. And, this is really a program around getting men more involved in the conversation, have them team up in mentoring, fostering, encouraging women to take on certain opportunities and roles. In fact, I'm really, really proud say that one of my current colleagues who recently joined our organization used to be the vice president of HR heading up our diversity and inclusion initiatives. Now, our organization, we are sort of very sort of business development, partnerships focused, but this is a great growth opportunity for her, and she's really enjoying her experience. So I think these are things that any employer can do, but I think, even making a macro statement, and I hope there are leaders in technology listening today, we need to come together as an industry, right? A technology industry, I spent a decade working at Microsoft. The now CEO Satya Nadella was embroiled in a controversy about a year back. He did not mean to say what he did at the Forbes Women's Summit in San Francisco, but I applaud that he quickly admitted fault and said, yes, I sounded really patronizing, right? So you have to admit, self-reflect, don't be in denial. The issues in Silicon Valley are rampant. We could spend a whole day, a couple of weeks, months discussing that. But I think in technology as a whole, we need to come together, create these programs, and really sort of bring about more inclusion and more parity around gender inclusion and diversity in general.
And I would add this, we need to see this also as a movement strength. As someone who studies movement, we would not get to the point of talking about male inclusion until we got all this work done on it, right? It's just like we're talking about race in this country, not because Black people waited for white people to bring up the issue, right? It's just like you work on it, and then, so if we're at the point where we're looking at and seeing men become more active, we need to see that as a movement, right? It's a movement victory, and we still need to move forward, right? But we've worked this hard to open up this space to even have that conversation, because of course it wouldn't be something that men would have led in saying gender parity, even though it affects them, right? We needed to do that first, but now that we have that strength, how do we make it even stronger to get to that gender parity? Because we have to do it with everyone included.
That's a great point. So I want to quickly open it up to the audience. You have a question, I know. Oh, thank you.
So I'm Amy Litzenberger, for anybody who doesn't know. I was co-founder of Take the Lead. I'm chair of the organization. And when Gloria and I started the organization, one of the things that we thought a lot about was obviously why don't we have gender leadership parity? And it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons is that the workday is basically a man's workday, and or it's not a family workday. Let me put it that way, and that women end up shouldering the majority of the burden in terms of picking up the kids from school, going to the soccer games, staying home when the kids are sick, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the workday is still a 9-to-5, 5-day-a-week workday. And we said, but it's 2000, and at the time it was 2013 or whatever it was. We have cell phones now. We have iPads now. We have computers. We don't have to be in the office at 4 o'clock when the kid's playing soccer. We could be on the soccer field doing our texts and on the phone and so forth and so on. And as much as it seems like technology can be the solution, and that it's kind of been slow to actually become that, is that we still have the man's work day. And to the point that you just said, is I think that the men are as anxious for it as the women are, is why are we still working 9 to 5? 5 days a week? Is what's happened is that everybody the workday has just expanded. Is everybody's working weekends, everybody's working at 9 o'clock at night, everybody's getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and looking at their cell phones and responding to texts while they're brushing their teeth, as opposed to companies coming around and saying, let's not judge people's productivity based on did they show up for 40 hours this week. Let's judge their productivity, did they accomplish the goals of the corporation this week? And I think that it's going to take a real sea change of companies realizing that the productivity of an employee is not a function of how many hours did they put in. It's more, did they work toward to further the goals of the corporation, which involves some real thinking process of what is the goals and how does that break down across the employees across the corporation. And I think that that's something that technology can actually facilitate, that being accomplished. And you can actually use technology to track whether those goals are being accomplished. And I would put that forth as a challenge for technology companies to start thinking in that direction.
Thank you. Talk about bringing men into the conversation. The conversation we're having now is about sexual predation, and who talks about it? Women. So I'm wondering if you think we should hold all men accountable to come forward and speak about the epidemic in our culture that is now being revealed, and to call them to account for not speaking about it. They've seen it in the next office, in the boardroom, in the taxi that takes the CEO off with a young hireling. They know what's happening. That's what happened at Fox News. That's how those men got away with it for years. They even let the company pay for it. Those were men. So don't you think, rather than making space for them, oh, please come in and talk about it, why don't we say, I think all men who work and see this epidemic happening, sexual predation, in every level, in every industry, in every workplace, should come forward and speak out about it, so that it isn't just women who then other men say, well, if that proves to be true, how's it going to prove to be true? Are we going to have a voice recording from 40 years ago? No, it's not going to be proved to be true. You either have to take the woman's word for it, or dismiss her. And we've been dismissing women for so many years. What do you think about that? Talk about embracing the controversy.
All right, well, I'll wade in since yeah. So I'll wade in. I mean, I think first is we need to believe women the first time. That's the first thing I would say. One of the things that we typically see when all these different stories come out is there has to be so many women that are actually talking about it, and in the most recent case, at least, there were fewer that had to come forward. But I think we need to believe women the first time, and I think that's certainly been an issue, whether we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace or we're talking about sexual assault of children, right? Because we know that girls are twice as likely to experience that as boys. I also would say that women and men know that this is happening in the workplace, so we need both women and men to speak up about it. And that's fundamentally about creating a culture that where we are not keeping secrets anymore, because a lot of these are open secrets. So it wasn't just men that allowed these things to happen in the workplace. It was also women, and I'm not faulting women. I'm just saying that we all have a part to play, and I think as long as the thing that always just maybe breaks my heart is just that when we continue to make it a divisive issue, we are just continuing to perpetrate what has already happened, and that for me is of the biggest concern. And I will tell you just very quickly, I personally feel that it's so important because I am the daughter and sister of refugees, and I am sitting here on this stage today because someone in a position of power said not on my watch and brought my family here to the United States, and that person happened to be President Eisenhower. And so when I think about us continuing to make this a divisive issue, I think about that. And I think about how difficult that decision must have been, and that we must, if we are going to solve this, we must no longer make it a divisive issue. We have to include everyone.
So I would add, I can hold both. I can hold people accountable, and look for people that are looking to make solutions. I think both exist at the same time. And we're constantly, right, it's a constant back and forth, right? It's the fact that, right, you can have people complicit in, these horrible crimes of both genders, right, is proof and evidence of how power shows up in our relationships, in our companies, and people will react to the power in a different way. So how do we, one, shed light on it, which is great that we're doing, and two, how do we hold people accountable for their actions, knowing that that accountability, I don't think the accountability is the divisiveness, right? The accountability helps us to get to the next stage of prevention, right? Because I think we all can agree we don't want sexual harassment happening anywhere, any place, right? But that needs to come through a process of accountability. And you also need, I use allyship, but you need to have partners who are looking to do it. And for people who are looking to find, how do we get to that place of prevention, of not having that? That involves men and women, and we need to have men in that conversation who will offer perspectives and understanding that we're not going to get just by having women have the conversation.
I think one thought I'd add, right, just really quick, at the risk of putting you on the spot, Sarah, I think, let's not discount the role of media, social media in general, in sharing of information, right? So again, at the risk of picking on those examples in Silicon Valley, what happened at Uber, what happened at Kleiner Perkins, the venture capital firm, these things have been widely known in the industry, but very quickly, if you saw the narrative evolve to the lack of business performance and or a compensation complaint from these women, right? And that to me was really distressing. I was like, the issue here is sexual harassment. The issue here is of somebody in a senior position of power, a male, exercising that right and essentially, either in the worst case, like totally circumventing and derailing the woman's career. But quickly the narrative evolved to, oh, well, the woman wasn't performing. She negotiated for a salary raise, and that didn't come through. With Ellen Powell, it was a question of equity, which is huge in these venture capital firms as a partner. And that completely derailed the narrative, right? And I think what we need to do, and all of us are responsible, men and women alike, and I'm happy to say on stage, men maybe more so than women, because there's a lot more of us in technology, stick to the issue, right? The narrative here is we need to talk about these things. Katica made a really good point. Every time any sort of complaint comes up, it takes a lot of courage for a woman to approach a manager, male or female, or HR and say, I have been sexually harassed. Nobody does that, because they think, hey, I'm going to get a rise out of it today, right? It is excruciating, and I can't even imagine how hard it is for a woman or any minority or anyone to come up and complain about these things, right? So you have to take that complaint as its source and investigate the issue for what it is.
Okay, on that note, we actually have to wrap up. So I know it's a hot topic, and we can all talk about it after, hopefully. So thank you all. Thank you, guys.